Welcome to Talent Talks, the podcast where your host, Dan Maisey, dives into hiring's ins and outs. Our goal is to reveal how to attract top talent. Through interviews with leaders in sports, media and entertainment, we explore job search and recruitment trends, offer interview tips and strategies to differentiate yourself and uncover their hiring insights. Whether you're prepping for an interview or interested in hiring trends, Talent Talks is your essential resource. Let's dive in. Matthew Barrett, founder of GoalClick, joins us on our pod today. Matthew has harnessed the universal language of football to connect people worldwide through their stories, capturing their experiences in grassroots and elite football through analog photography, written narratives and film. GoalClick's collaborations with major organisations like FIFA, UEFA and Adidas, and its features in prestigious media outlets such as The Guardian and The New York Times, underscore Matthew's impact on sports and culture globally. With a multidisciplinary background in sports marketing and partnership activities, and as a recognised sports industry next-gen leader, Matthew's insights are sure to enrich our discussions on navigating the evolving landscapes of job search and recruitment within the sports, media and entertainment industries. Matt, welcome to Talent Talks. How are you?
Can you write all of my introductions? Because that was great.
Of course. I can send this off to you. I have done that before to previous guests where I've sent them the intro so that you can use it in their own ways. I'm quite proud of them. I've said this so many times. People that are listening are going to be like, stop talking about the intros.
It's always very nice to hear what other people say about you and in a very easily feedbackable moment. So I'm very well, thank you. And thanks for having me on board to talk about recruitment and talent.
Yeah, looking forward to it. So let's get straight into it. We asked this, as you know, to each of our guests to begin with. What are your experiences of hiring and being hired, and do you have any lessons learned?
It was a really good question because it made me think a lot about my own personal journey and how atypical I think it has been. Maybe you'll tell me it's typical, but I only really ever got hired for one job. And even that wasn't really, I think, a well-trodden pathway. So when I started working for Hill Knowlton in 2009, I had applied for a fairly generic graduate scheme, and then the HR department called me up the next day and said, do you want to do 6 weeks work experience in the sports team? And in hindsight, 6 weeks is quite a lot for work experience. And then 6 weeks work experience led to a 4-month internship. And then bam, 6 months later, I was offered a full-time job. So that really has been my only ever interview that has led me to be hired, which was for 6 weeks work experience. For the 9 years after that, I was actually almost transferred between different companies within a bigger group. And then I went full-time on GoalClick in 2018. Obviously, as the CEO and founder, I didn't have to interview for that. So my experiences of being hired are actually relatively small, but even that experience, when I measure it against what I see the industry now doing, shows how much everything has changed in the last 20 years. I'm sure we can get into that in a bit. In terms of hiring people, again, it's quite atypical. I guess in my agency days, I was involved in junior level hirings in a fairly standard way. But from a GoalClick perspective, we largely deal in what I call permalancers. I'm not sure how ubiquitous that term is.
I like it.
But that's I thought everyone used it, and then every time I say it, someone says, "What's a permalancer?" Ultimately, we generally hire freelancers, but they work for us on an ongoing basis. You know, our social media lead has worked for us 2.5 days a week for the last 2.5 years. You know, they are a freelancer with other jobs, but they are, in a way, a permanent part of the team. So, yeah, permalancers is pretty much what GoalClick was made up of, with 2 full-time staff, one of them being myself. So I think the hiring of those people is by nature very different, maybe, from other parts of the industry, because I guess I'm looking both for people who are willing to have a freelance lifestyle, but also who want to join a team for the long term. So yeah, that's my experiences so far in a nutshell. Hopefully that sets us up nicely.
It does. I am writing notes after notes with questions after questions. But the first one I do have, and this is, we don't have to get into this, it's just purely of interest. The 6 weeks work experience followed by the 4-month internship, were they paid?
6 weeks work experience was not, which as a point is something I would never do. now. I'm pretty uncomfortable with any unpaid work experience, to be honest. But yeah, 6 weeks unpaid was quite a lot. And 4 months internship was on an equivalent of 12K a year. I believe that practice has all changed in the world of WPP now. But yeah, in 2009, it was quite a lot. I could only do it because I was living at home just outside London, quite frankly.
Yeah.
The classic conundrum.
I think the really good thing about the way the industry has moved on is that they do still exist, of course they do, but it's certainly not within the big groups. Because again, when I came into the world of work and the world of sport, even moving from Accenture into sport at the time, it was still rife with, well, if you want to come into sport, you need to do it's almost like you need to do your time being unpaid. It's like, well, how am my parents didn't live near London. My brother lived in London at the time, but I couldn't really rely on him to house. I mean, I did for the first few months, but it had to house me for free and all that kind of stuff. So it's like, how does this work? But I think now that has changed. So, it's not just WPP. Everyone used to do it, and now that has changed. So I think that is a real positive impact on the kind of change in hiring practices anyway.
There's also a much more professional pathway now to the sports industry. I mean, when I declared that I wanted to work in sport in 2008, I look back at some of the roles I applied for. It was comedy, actually. I didn't know what to apply for, what a sports marketing agency was, what an actual... I applied for things that probably weren't even sport because they said the word sport at some point. I now look at my last role before Gold Click was at Two Circles, and that kind of graduate scheme now, the world has moved on so far. Yeah. And I think anyone coming out of university now, or even not going to university, can see where the opportunities are to enter the sports industry.
Yeah.
Honestly, 15, 20 years ago, it really wasn't there. It was a bit of a Wild West. It was reliant on fudging your way through and work experiences. And there was a few companies who were famous and everyone did their graduate internship at IMG. But the professionalization is so clear now. Sport is now an industry like management consulting, whereas 15, 20 years ago, if it wasn't law, management consultancy, accountancy, or finance, there didn't really seem to be much of a clear pathway.
Yeah. No, I completely agree with that. And I think it was very much, it still is, and we can get into this a bit later, but there is still a huge amount of the network side of things. But again, when I was trying to move in from Accenture, I remember having conversations with people that I've never spoken to since because they were wildly unhelpful, being brutally honest. But if I didn't have those conversations, there was no chance, of me just going in and going, well, I've got 3 years experience at a major management consultancy here. How do I get into sport? And it was only really it was post Olympics, but it was essentially thanks to the Olympics, because LOCOG were pretty much the first organisation. I say this with a huge generalisation here. I haven't any data to back this up, but in my opinion, we're probably the first organisation that really looked outside of the sports industry to bring people in because they had to. And you had people from... My boss that brought me into CSM was what previously, before it became CSM, was ex-Accenture. And so you had that pathway made available to you because the amount of people that needed to be hired for LOCOG meant that you had to look elsewhere. And I've had this conversation on the pod with Simon Massey-Taylor, who came from C into LOCOG at the time. Now he's obviously CEO of Prem Rugby, but that wouldn't have happened without that opportunity into something where they needed that amount of people that quickly. I want to kind of come back to something you mentioned in the first answer there as well, and where you said you did your 6 week work experience, 4 month internship, and then you were transferred a lot within the bigger group. How was that handled internally? Was that you pushing it? Was that right? We need Matt's expertise over here. How kind of, just from an internal move perspective, how was that handled?
So to put a bit more meat on the bones, I did 6 years at Hill Knowlton, and then I advocated to move internally to a new company that WPP was setting up called ESP. I wanted to be part of that. And actually, it was handled really well. I ended up splitting my time for a few months and gradually moving over. It was done really, really well, actually. And then I worked at ESP for 2 years. And then ESP ceased to be. It was not a success. And we, kind of WPP, ESP, had obviously acquired Two Circles and pushed it together with ESP, but ultimately Two Circles kind of ate ESP, and a couple of us went over to work for Two Circles. So one was me proactively pushing for it, and the other was market forces creating a situation where were let go, and others were fused into two circles. So, yeah, I mean, I don't think there's huge insights from those processes, except that it was really useful to go through from my perspective to see, one, what could happen proactively, but then two, what happens when an organization fails. And it was really eye-opening for me that no business has a right to exist. And that I think we always think when we join these big companies, oh, they'll always exist. But actually, it showed me the potential frailty of small business, and it stays with me today all the time. Organizations have no right to exist, and they can disappear. So yeah, that was quite a big learning early in my days.
And how is that informed? I know you said about the Permalancer element earlier, but you do have one member of full-time staff as well. How is that informing your approach to finding the right people for your business?
Well, I think it's also informing a little bit of risk appetite. I love that we can scale up and scale down quite fast. And we're a small business. The difference between huge success and failure can be one big client. And I think that experience at ESP has made me acutely aware that you need to plan adequately for things not going so well. And I think the Permalancer model really works for us in the size we are, and with the risk appetite I have, and knowing that I don't want to necessarily expose myself to huge overheads at the stage of our growth.
Yeah.
It kind of works for everybody. It works for the employees, it works for us. But yeah, it's definitely a strong element in that I prefer this model so that we can, if needs be, make quick decisions in the space of a month rather than, have a time horizon of 3 months or 6 months and lots of employee benefits to weigh up. I think we obviously pay over the odds for freelance staff on a day rate, but there are benefits long term for the health of the business.
Yeah. And on that, not going into specifics, of course, but ultimately, if you're not paying,
it's hard with a team of just 8 people to not go specific.
No, that's very true. But okay, on a more generalised basis, yes, you're going over and above on the day rate side of things, if you think about it from that. But if you're not paying overheads and you're not paying ultimately that side of things, you're still coming out relatively similar from a kind of year-end perspective, surely.
I think better.
Yeah.
Also, we're a remote organisation, so we have no offices. Our current 8 staff members are spread all around the globe. Currently, Argentina, France, Germany, probably when this is launched, Costa Rica, and then half the team are in the UK, but spread around the UK, north, central, and south. So it's a remote model. It's baked into GoldClick's being, to be honest, that we're a remote organisation with a remote methodology of how we do our work. So we practice what we preach. And also it means that we attract different kinds of people who want to work for GoldClick. A more multinational, a group of people who are happy working in a very different way. I say net positives. There's always things that are slightly kind of more challenging. But yeah, I think that we'll come into this, I'm sure, in a moment. But we attract a certain type of person with a certain type of outlook and a certain type of work ethic. And we have built the organisation wanting those kind of people.
And well, let's dig straight into it. So a couple of questions I want to kind of pick up on there. But I suppose the first question is, bearing in mind the needs for your company are so global and in such different markets, how do you go about attracting the right talent? And following on from that, to make it an even bigger question, what is it that you look for? What are those values? What are the key skills? What's the most important thing that you look for when you are bringing them on?
Yeah. Well, I think first of all, the pool is relatively small at the outset because we are looking for people who are willing to work remotely, who are probably going to be of a freelance persuasion or at least have 2 jobs, one they do half the time, one they do the other half the time. And people who are just imbued with that kind of work ethic of being self-starting. We naturally attract diversity. We need diversity, and it's a self-fulfilling cycle.
Yeah.
I'll give an example. I guess I call it the engine room of GoldClick, where we hire junior staff members. One of our employees, she is Dutch Moroccan living in Germany. you can imagine that is useful when you are doing projects with German women, Dutch girls, or Arabic women. And so why would we not want to hire from the global pool, so to speak? So it's not even a question in our mind that when we hire, we make it global within reason. We tend to find that we probably need someone to be within 4 or 5 time zones of the UK. But that does allow for South America, East Coast, United States, Middle East, North Africa, Europe. We hire a mixture through LinkedIn and through our personal networks. We generally believe that our next hire already knows someone who's part of the GoalClick network. And by network, I mean the thousands of people who have connected with GoalClick around the world or been part of the project. We've almost accidentally created a bit of a global talent pool ourselves by the nature of having almost like a fixer in every single country. The word spreads around GoalClick. And honestly, the 300 applications we got for a role last year, it was United Nations. Completely balanced, I believe, by gender, by background, by nationality. It's quite amazing, actually, to see what comes in, a mixture through LinkedIn and through our social media postings. So, yeah, that's how we do it. And currently it seems to have worked pretty well.
I mean, I think the really interesting thing about it is you're naturally attracting that diversity element. And that's not just diversity from a traditional sense, that is diversity of thought that comes in and challenges you and helps ultimately push GoalClick forward. And I think that is a challenge in the wider sports industry as to how we really tackle bringing people, representatives of all colours, genders, whatever it is. How do we make sure that they are coming into sport? Because I think there is still is a little bit of an old boys club at certain places. Now, that's not obviously. That's a massive generalisation, but and it is getting better. But again, I was speaking to a major rights holder last week, and it was how can we really make sure that we are giving ourselves the best opportunity to bring as diverse a candidate pool as possible through.
Well, it can be very hard, I think, for organisations to be realistic. If you are expecting to be in a certain office a certain number of days a week. And, we're very lucky that our entire reason for being is to be remote and to encourage people to be where they need to be. I mean, actually, you've made me think a little bit about the people we have in GoalClick. There's a strong sense of people who move. I mean, our creative lead is Romanian, currently living in Argentina. I already mentioned our project manager, who's Dutch Moroccan, living in Germany. We have our communications lead who moved to France. Our MD is living in various different communities in Italy and Costa Rica. We've built a team that isn't afraid to be out of a comfort zone, I guess. Yeah. Always willing to adapt. It's like it attracts a very adaptable person. I'm almost thinking in real time here. It attracts a very adaptable person, and I think there's no surprise that in all of our job descriptions, the word adaptable comes up in every single one.
Yeah.
Adaptable, driven, communicative, because in a way, those are the people we actually look to work with from GoalClick's core storytelling perspective. Yeah. We want adaptable, driven, and communicative people. Sometimes people react to this, what I'm about to say, but I'm going to explain it well, I think. One of the kind of internal stipulations around our hiring process is that we need potential candidates to reply to us within 24 hours of a communication, because I think it tells you a lot about how they will then be with the work that we do going forward with both clients and the storytellers that we work with around the world. Communication is so important to GoalClick that I think, right from the start, we need someone who is properly on it. And actually, in the last process we did, 100% of people that we offered a first round interview replied within 24 hours. So it isn't actually really that disqualifying, but it's just something we think is a fundamental and is quite important to the way in which we do business. And actually, some people have said, is that discriminating against people who might not have stable Wi-Fi connection? Well, I can tell you that we work with people in every single country in the world, from Peru to Palestine to Iran to even North Korea. And if people want to communicate, they find a way, and ubiquitousness of WhatsApp and technology now means that most people can communicate pretty fast. And obviously, the fundamental of GoalClick is quick, speedy communication with people. And if that isn't possible, then it probably means we're not the right fit for them because we're a bit of an atypical organisation.
But I think what that really breaks down into is the element that you're ensuring that the people that are applying to your roles actually want to join you and have done the work and have done the research and have been proactive in, right, who are GoalClick? What's this job description? Do I fit the job description? Yes, but actually, is this an organisation I'd want to work for anyway? Because I think there's an element at the moment of ease. LinkedIn's easy apply button is potentially one of the worst inventions from a job market perspective in the world, because organisations get 300, 400, 500, 600 applicants come through, but half of those candidates are going to be totally irrelevant because it's just somebody going, yeah, it looks all right. I'll click apply because I don't have to do anything to apply for that job. And I think there's been a bit of a shift away from, as much as I think organisations have to sell themselves to candidates as much as the other way around, I do think there's also been a bit of a shift away from candidates necessarily having to do the work and the realization that you're probably not just going to get a job just by going, right, easy apply to 100 jobs a day, because something might come out of that. But is that going to be a role that you're going to be interested in as a candidate? Are you going to be able to add value to the organisation? I'd argue probably not on both points.
I have an interesting perspective on the length and the work that needs to happen to apply to something, because honestly, I think it got ridiculous for a time what people had to do to apply for a job. I mean, what? Like, how many words in the application? It's just crazy. And also the time for the internal team to have to sift through that. I mean, what are we doing? So hopefully that's largely gone away. But equally, the other extreme is even worse. We tend to, apart from the fundamentals, just ask two really simple questions whenever we hire for a role. One is, why do you want to work for GoalClick? And believe me, you can see a lot very instantly from that answer. And number two is, what's one thing about you that your CV doesn't tell us? Which is a really great way for people to kind of break the shackles of the traditional CV and allow someone to express themselves and why they would be perfect for GoalClick because of their own personality and something else they bring to the table. And yeah, we find that's just the right, it's the Goldilocks, just the right amount of questions to allow someone's personality to come through, but also people can do it in 15 minutes. Yeah. So you shouldn't have to spend more than 15 minutes like registering your interest in a job.
I think it's ultimately it's a fine balance. I'm conscious of time, so I'll say this quickly, but it's a fine balance between ease, but there is still an effort that needs to be made. But it's more of an effort around, actually, is this an organisation that I want to work for? And I agree with you. I remember going through processes that took hours and you like tests, and you're like, well, I'm not sure I even want this job. Like after I did before, but now I definitely don't. And I think there's a very easy way of being in the middle. But right, I said
one other thing to say.
Yeah, go on.
Our final thing, we do a short practical task that would usually take an hour, because I think you can learn so much more about how someone thinks with that practical task, and it's just a bit more practical, a bit more like lived experience.
Is that further down the interview process?
Further down the line, yeah. The final thing would probably be a few of the candidates doing the practical task before the final decision is made.
I agree. Being able to see how a candidate can, it's just how they think ultimately is a really interesting way of doing it. Right. We have come to the time, Matt, where we do our final three questions, quickfire. So I will get straight into it. What is your most frustrating thing about recruitment?
I think it's what I almost said earlier. It's a lack of clear pathway or an excessively long application form are probably the two things that I've been frustrated with in my life at seeing.
Yeah, no, agreed on that front. And you don't have to name them, but you're, again, more than welcome to. Who's been your best hire and why?
So I think that ultimately organisations run on their engine rooms. That junior cadre of people who support everybody else and free up the time of more senior staff to bring in revenue. So there's no surprise that our full-time staff member at the moment is in that engine room as a project manager. And I will just say that it is very important to get that part of the business very right. I think lots of people start with the senior and go top down, but I think you're only ever as good as your junior engine room.
And I think as well, if you're able to impact somebody that can come in and make a real difference from a junior level, then that I think shows your leadership element and your leadership skills and what you can bring to the table from that perspective. It's supposed to be quick fire. Apologies. Last one. What is the one thing you would change about the recruitment world?
It's never quick fire with me. Don't worry about that. Transparency around how much it costs to work with recruiters. I think it's still quite misunderstood. And so good luck for everything you are doing, because I think there's still a lot of uncertainty about, how much outlay goes on recruitment. And, there's obviously a lack of guarantee of it being successful, but it can be, from a small business perspective, it can be quite like an inhale of breath to even think about spending on a recruiter. And I don't think I have a particularly firm grasp of what the financials often are. So yeah, I think I'm sure everything you're doing around models and tierings is all going to solve this once and for all. But I think it's definitely an issue in the sector.
Yeah. No, I don't disagree. I think there's recruitment's a very traditional market, and it's how you take it into the slightly more modern world around the amount of small businesses and the amount of new companies that are being established at the moment, which is great from an economic perspective, but obviously there's elements of, as you say, change that need to happen as well. We could carry on. I've written so many more questions down that we didn't even get to, but that's not a bad thing, because it means that we can bring you back on in the future. But look, thank you very much for your time.
That's great.
Really appreciate it. It's really interesting to hear your take from your experience, both from a kind of big company at the start of your career and coming down into what you own and the great stuff that GoldClick's doing. So thanks for taking the time to come on Talent Talks.
My pleasure, and hopefully the slightly atypical nature of the world I inhabit was useful for a different take. Yeah. So thanks very much, and speak soon.
Yeah. Cheers, Matt.